companies are learning how to better grapple with the fact that they might have policies that are odious to their own employees or to their own audiences that they have to figure out.
So welcome everybody to the second episode of the Coffee with a Purpose. We're going to be chatting with Danielle, the Director of Strategic Partnerships at the ACLU. And really, without a need for introduction, everything that has been going on the past week and the past 4 years, we are so excited to have her here really to share her perspective personally as well as from the point of view of the ACLU.
Let's start off, Danielle. Tell us about what's going on in the ACLU right at this moment with the election. And also, you have this initiative, Count Every Vote. So just give us the landscape of the things that are happening right now and what you're working on. Could not be more topical to today and waiting for the outcome.
We've been a little busy at the ACLU, as you can imagine. I think in the frame of what's happening now in the election, I think it's important to give a tiny bit of context. The ACLU turned 100 this year, and we've been fighting for voting rights for our entire existence as an organization. But I think it's really important to frame this current election with the massive increase of voter suppression policies and laws that we've seen pass in states across the country. And then with the context of how the Voting Rights Act was gutted in 2013, which made it easier for especially states across the South that had a history of suppressing Black voters in particular. But this also impacted students, this impacted rural communities, Native Americans. And so we're seeing a lot of that playing out in this election season. So the ACLU was already super busy leading into this election season, working on voting rights. And then with the COVID crisis, I wouldn't say switch gears, but really pulled back and said, okay, what is the biggest barrier to all Americans at this point? And how does that compound Americans that are already facing voter suppression tactics? And so the real focus of the ACLU, where we've won 26 lawsuits since COVID started, has been working to ensure that as many people as possible can cast their vote by mail, as many people as possible can still early vote in states that previously didn't have as long early voting, that there's plenty of drop boxes and many more. And then looking at literally just the past couple of days, it's important that the ACLU has been helping to combat a lot of the fights that the Trump campaign has been bringing in order to try to stop the counting of ballots, especially in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, in Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona. So he's tried to bring legal challenges in all of those states. And it's important to flag that a lot of those states, especially Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, initially tried to change their policy to count votes earlier, mail-in ballots earlier, because many other states like Florida, for example, has been counting mail-in ballots since they've been arriving. But the Republican state legislatures in those states halted all of the counting of those votes until election day itself. There's been a tricky narrative there, right, where the Trump campaign has said, well, why are we just finding out now? And the reality is that was all by design to make it harder for those states to be able to count the mail-in ballots, knowing that a lot of minorities in particular and people of color were going to be voting by mail this year.
And so when you think about, the months to come, because it's, we're likely going to be in legal battles because he's not going to give up. Trump is not going to give up. So when we think about what the ACLU and the fight that you've outlined is going to happen in those key states, what should corporate America be doing, right? When you think about, and the people who are listening to this, and they think about the brands that they represent, how should they be supporting either directly or indirectly the efforts of the ACLU and others in fighting this? What can corporate America do to really not just combat the legal challenges that he's bringing, but really thinking just about how we try to restore some form of semblance of the importance of democracy? Talk to us about that.
Love it. I love that question. And I want to start answering that question by acknowledging how much companies have already done. Mm-hmm. So it's when we think about the people who are literally, like in Georgia, staying up all night to count votes, or people who, in Arizona and Pennsylvania, first and foremost, I think companies have a stake in this in a way that they haven't before because they've put their own employees on the line, right? They've made it clear to their employees that they want to give time off to vote, that they want to provide forums with their employees to do civic literacy around the importance of not just the federal races, but the down ballot races, that they want to give folks time off to volunteer and to be poll watchers and poll monitors or to do phone banking. Companies are already playing a bigger role in civic engagement and really acknowledging that a more civically engaged employee base means a stronger employee base overall and a stronger democracy in which companies can operate. And then I think in this specific moment, one is almost purely for, the sake of democracy, but also to honor the poll workers themselves. It's critical to help to extend the platform of Count Every Vote. So shout out to Justine and the Clara Lionel Foundation, because they've definitely been amplifying that message. So I think that's a continued message that's going to be really important. And to give the backdrop of it's not just count every vote because we think that might mean that we'll have a different president. It's count every vote because that's how democracy works best, right? That is a fundamental foundation on which our democracy lies. I think the other piece that would be powerful throughout this process and leading into 2021 is the role that companies can play in using this as an opportunity for civic literacy. It's fascinating how many questions are going about, right? And at least the network that I'm in of like, okay, well, when does the Electoral College vote? Is that December 13th? Why is that so much later? Like, when are votes certified? And then I think there's a real opportunity for folks to engage and to better understand the role that they play in determining who our leaders are and the decisions they make. Another piece that is an area where companies have been incredibly active, that is wildly under threat and it's not getting as much media attention as everyone can imagine why, is the census. Yeah. So even though this election is going to affect the next 2 and 4 years, the census affects the next 10 years. And unfortunately, the Trump administration is continuing to try to discount non-citizens from being counted in the census, which would have devastating effects on how health and human services are, distributed across the country, what communities get discounted in terms of having the right resources in order to take care, hospitals, schools, you name it. And then from a business standpoint, it impacts, right, your operation, streets, roads, commercial spaces, et cetera. The final thing that I would love companies to forecast looking ahead is one of the tremendous battlefronts that we've seen in the past election, especially with COVID compounding it, is voter suppression. We know that voter suppression has largely negatively impacted Black communities across this country, and we need to restore the Voting Rights Act. And so we are looking to push the Voting Rights Advancement Act early 2021 to protect voters, from here on out. And we have a group of companies that have already signed on to endorse that and would love more support.
What are some of the challenges of working with the ACLU? Because as you raised a moment ago that, and we're seeing this right in our work and everyone's work, that there is a heightened sense of leaning into and taking on issues. And in fact, all the polling data will suggest and tell you that consumers want CEOs of companies to be much more activist, right? We're seeing more of that. Rather than just asking all the great ways you can work the ACLU, you've laid out ways for companies to get involved. What are some of the challenges of working the ACLU? Because I'm assuming you're not for everybody, right? So talk to us about that, because I think as we think about partnerships, we think about ways that organizations and companies can come together to advance social issues. Talk to us about some of those challenges.
Well, I want to just clarify, I think the beauty of the ACLU is that we are for everybody. Right? Like, we want to make sure that the Constitution, that we the people, actually means all of us, everyone living in this country. And the challenge is that we are not okay when people are working to harm other people or to take away other people's rights and liberties. The challenge of working with the ACLU is that we will surface potentially all of those concerns, whether it's, something that the ACLU is a core principle of ours, or whether it's something that we just know is part of the social justice community zeitgeist. I feel like the role that we're trying to play is that call-in culture. We would call in a company not because we necessarily want to undermine and shame and destroy them, but rather because we actually respect them enough to say, look, you can do better. Your employees want you to do better. Your customers want you to do better. And the world will be a better place if you address XYZ policy.
I really appreciate your insights as always and their perspectives. And I think, for companies in particular, thinking about how they can work with you, I think you've laid out both issues that they can take on where we can bridge that divide. And I think that's hope for optimism with what's to come. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Danielle, and everybody that joined us today. And then we'll be back next week.
All right, everyone. Thank you.